Imagine, right now, the most powerful dictator on Earth. I mean, a guy who controls the military, the economy, the media, the whole thing.
Right. Absolute total control over the entire system.
Exactly. The state's power is woven into, like, every single aspect of daily life. But then his lead scientists, his own hand-picked experts, uncover a truth that totally contradicts the state propaganda.
And he obviously doesn't handle that well.
No, not at all. I mean, he doesn't argue the data, right? He doesn't, bring in a separate team to audit their methodology.
No, he just straight up threatens to crucify them.
Yes,
Yeah?
simply because they reached a conclusion without his permission. And you might think we're talking about, I don't know, a modern dystopia or some 20th century totalitarian regime.
Or like the plot of a sci-fi thriller, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. But we are actually looking at one of the oldest stories in human history. We're talking about Moses, Pharaoh, and, well, the ultimate failure of state-sponsored propaganda.
And it is a text that has just been fundamentally misunderstood for centuries. Because, we've been conditioned to read it through this very specific sentimental lens.
Right, like a Sunday school story.
Exactly. We read it as a story about magic.
Yeah.
But when you strip away all that theological romanticism...
Which we're going to do today.
Yeah, absolutely. When you analyze the source text through like a sociological and structural lens, you find something entirely different.
You'll find a precise blueprint, basically.
Right. A blueprint of how authoritarian regimes manufacture reality. And, more importantly, how that manufactured reality collapses when it hits objective evidence.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because that is the core mission of our deep dive today. We're taking the source material, specifically Surah 26 verses 32 through 49.
And we are doing a complete intellectual teardown of it.
Exactly. We aren't looking at this as a fable about a magic staff and some snakes. We are reading it the way like a systems engineer or a sociologist would read a text on civilizational survival.
Because the traditional reading presents these so-called sorcerers as, cartoon villains.
Right, guys in pointy hats.
Yeah, guys in pointy hats who suddenly experience this weeping emotional conversion to the good side just because Moses had a flashier magic trick.
And we are going to completely explode that myth today because it misses the structural point entirely, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. We have to explode it. These individuals were not villains who magically became heroes.
Right. What were they actually?
They were elite, highly paid professional evaluators of evidence. That was their literal job description within Pharaoh's regime.
They were the counter-narrative apparatus.
Exactly. Their primary function was to manufacture a spectacle to keep the public pacified. But their secondary, and honestly equally vital function, was to distinguish genuine structural phenomena from illusions.
So when they eventually fall down, when they prostrate themselves, as the text describes, it's not a religious submission to some magical power.
Not at all. It is a brutal, calculated, professional verdict.
Okay, let's ground that right away, because that is like a massive paradigm shift for you listening.
It really is.
If they are professional evaluators of evidence, then they aren't submitting out of fear, right? They aren't submitting out of blind faith either.
No, they are submitting to reality itself. They are applying their professional expertise, and their conclusion is that what Moses has demonstrated is structurally real.
Well, what they do for a living is basically fundamentally fake.
Exactly.
Oh.
But to truly understand why this professional verdict is so devastating, we first have to, understand the socio-political architecture that Moses is trying to dismantle.
Right, because the system Moses is confronting isn't just one guy sitting on a throne making up arbitrary rules.
Right, it's not just a king. It is a highly engineered systemic triumvirate. It's a three-legged stool of authoritarian control.
So we aren't just dealing with Pharaoh the individual. We are dealing with an entire state apparatus. Let's break down those three pillars.
Sure. So the text is very careful to outline these three distinct pillars, embodied by three archetypal figures. Yeah. First, obviously, you have Pharaoh.
And he represents the centralization of raw political tyranny, right?
Exactly. The dictatorship.
Yeah.
The absolute monopoly on state violence. But history shows us that raw violence is just incredibly expensive and inefficient to maintain long-term.
Yeah, you can't just beat everyone into submission forever.
Right. You cannot keep a generational underclass, in this case the Israelites, subjugated solely with whips and chains.
Yeah.
They will eventually rebel.
Which means you need the second pillar, and that's represented by the figure of Haman.
Yes. Haman embodies the religious and psychological manipulation apparatus.
So he's the one managing the state narrative, basically.
He is the priesthood, the media monopoly, the manufacturer of consent. His whole job is to construct a theological or ideological framework.
A framework that basically convinces the subjugated working class that their oppression is like a divine mandate.
Exactly, or an inevitable law of nature. He
Yeah.
makes the chains invisible, essentially.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. Making the chains invisible. And
Yeah.
then you have the third pillar, right?
Right, represented by Karun. And Karun embodies the capitalist exploitative monopoly over resources.
The money guy. He controls the wealth, the supply chains, the means of production.
Exactly. Political tyranny, psychological manipulation, and economic exploitation. They operate as this totally symbiotic organism.
Yeah, you can't separate Pharaoh's military from Karun's money or Haman's propaganda. They are completely intertwined to sustain the ruling class.
And this brings us to, a massive linguistic distinction in our source material that completely shifts how we view the conflict.
Right, because usually we just read this as a religious fight.
Exactly. When we read standard translations of these ancient texts, the word used to describe the system Pharaoh runs is deen.
Okay, Deen, D-E-N.
Yeah. And for centuries, deen has been mistranslated merely as private religion.
So the translation implies that Pharaoh is just the high priest of, a specific polytheistic cult.
And that Moses is showing up to preach a new monotheistic religion. But that's just wrong.
I mean, I have to stop you there because I'm struggling with this leap. If Pharaoh literally owns the army, the money, and the priesthood,
Yeah.
why is he so incredibly insecure about one guy from the desert? I mean, if we look at it just as a religious disagreement, it feels like a massive overreaction.
It does. And your skepticism is exactly why the mistranslation of deen is so fatal to understanding the text.
Okay, so what does it actually mean here?
In this context, deen does not mean private spiritual belief. Pharaoh does not care what unseen entity Moses prays to in his living room. Yeah.
Right. So what is the Deen?
Deen means the comprehensive socio-political and economic state system.
Oh, wow. So it's the Constitution.
Yes, it's the law of the land. It's the exact way labor is distributed and wealth is extracted.
So when Pharaoh expresses fear about Moses, and the text explicitly records Pharaoh saying he fears Moses will change your Deen.
Or cause chaos in the land, yeah.
Right. He isn't worried about Moses starting a rival book club or a new worship circle.
Not at all. Pharaoh is terrified that Moses is going to rewrite the socio-economic constitution.
Because Moses is threatening the centralized economy that relies entirely on the subjugated, unpaid labor of the Israelites.
Exactly. Moses isn't just a preacher looking for converts. He is a systemic disruptor.
He's a revolutionary.
Yeah, he's looking to strip the ruling class of their monopoly on wealth and power and emancipate an enslaved workforce. Moses is literally threatening the supply chain.
Which completely recontextualizes the whole idea of apostasy in this narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
Usually when we hear the word apostasy or rad, we think of someone having a personal crisis of faith.
Right, like they decide that they don't believe in the tenets of their church or mosque anymore, and they just walk away.
But in an authoritarian state where the state is the ideology.
Where the deen is the total structural reality.
Yeah, in that system, changing your deen is not a personal spiritual matter at all. It is high treason.
It is an act of political rebellion designed to topple the state apparatus.
I mean, think about how modern ideological states operate today.
Right.
If you live under a state where the economic model and the foundational myth of the nation are deeply intertwined.
Which is a lot of states, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And you start writing manifestos that fundamentally challenge the validity of that system.
If you propose a completely different economic model that strips the current elites of their monopoly,
you are not treated as just a philosophical dissenter. You are investigated. You are marginalized.
you're deemed a threat to national security.
Exactly. The state treats you as an enemy because you are threatening the deen that keeps the elite in power.
And that is exactly how Pharaoh views Moses. Moses is pointing out the structural rot of the entire triumvirate.
So the state has to respond, and this is where the narrative traditionally focuses on the big dramatic showdown.
The showdown, yes. But we need to look at why there's a showdown.
Right, because if Pharaoh is so terrified of an economic rebellion, why risk a public showdown at all?
What do you mean?
Well, why not just assassinate Moses in the dark? Have the military disappear him? It seems incredibly risky to give a systemic disruptor a massive public platform.
That brings us directly to how authoritarian public relations actually works.
Okay, walk me through that.
Pharaoh understands that power rests entirely on perception. If he sends the military to kill Moses in a dungeon, Moses just becomes a martyr.
Oh, right. The systemic critique Moses introduced survived him. The whispers of rebellion will just move underground.
Exactly. The only way to permanently neutralize a systemic threat is to destroy their credibility. You have to weaponize public opinion.
So you don't just kill the whistleblower, you humiliate them.
You make the truth look ridiculous, so the lie can maintain its structural integrity.
That is fascinating. If Pharaoh's state apparatus can publicly, theoretically prove to the masses that Moses is a fraud,
Then the state's narrative is forever cemented as the unquestionable truth. The masses will literally police themselves.
they will mock anyone who brings up Moses' ideas again.
Exactly. That is why Pharaoh calls for a massive public gathering. He needs a spectacle.
And to create that spectacle, he activates the counter-narrative apparatus. He summons the sorcerers.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. We really need to pause and demystify this word magic.
Yeah, let's talk about the Arabic word used in the text, which is sir.
Sir. And our source material makes it abundantly clear that sir did not mean casting spells with wands or like violating the laws of physics.
So what did it mean?
Sir refers to subtle deception. It is the science of optical illusions, misdirection, and highly sophisticated psychological manipulation.
It's the craft of making something appear to be true when it's fundamentally false.
Exactly. So we have to stop picturing guys in robes chanting incantations.
We should think of them as the spin doctors of the ancient world.
Yes, they are the deepfake engineers, the psychological warfare unit.
They are the magi, the elite technical professionals whose entire job is to create the state's manufactured truth.
Let's use a modern analogy here. Imagine a massive multinational corporation has just caused a devastating environmental disaster.
Okay, like an oil spill or something.
Yeah, exactly. The water is poisoned, people are sick, the evidence is everywhere. The CEO doesn't just go on television and say, "We didn't do it."
Right, that's too clumsy. No one would buy it.
Instead, they hire a high-end PR firm, a crisis management team.
And this team produces slick documentaries. They fund dubious counter-studies.
They flood the media zone with conflicting data. They manipulate the algorithm so that when you search for the disaster, you only see their eco-friendly marketing campaigns.
So they don't change the reality of the poison water. They change the public's perception of the water.
Exactly. And that is exactly what these ancient professionals did.
And the text provides an incredible, often overlooked piece of evidence to prove that these individuals are cold, calculating professionals, right?
Yes, it really does. It shows they aren't religious zealots fighting for their faith.
Because when they are summoned by Pharaoh, what is the very first thing they do?
They don't fall to their knees and say, "Oh, mighty Pharaoh, we are here to defend our glorious gods against this desert heretic."
No. They ask about their paycheck. They say, will there be a reward for us if we win?
They are literally mercenaries negotiating their consulting fee before they take the gig.
They want to make sure the invoice clears before they start the spin campaign.
It really just strips away all the mystical romance of the story. They are the ultimate insiders.
They know the state's religion is a game. They know the system is built on illusion.
And they are playing it purely for profit and proximity to power.
And Pharaoh agrees to their terms, of course.
Of course he does, because he desperately needs their technical expertise to execute the public humiliation of Moses.
So the stage is set for the trial of the century, and it's broadcast live to the entire subjugated population.
On one side, you have the state's highly paid perception hackers.
On the other side, you have Moses, the systemic disruptor.
And this brings us to the showdown sequence itself, which the text details in verses 44 through 48.
Let's reconstruct this with absolute forensic precision. What actually happens mechanically in the text?
So, verse 44 tells us the sorcerers go first. They throw their ropes and their staffs.
They launch their PR campaign.
Yeah, they deploy the ancient equivalent of the deepfake. Now, we must isolate the operative word used in the text to describe the effects of their action.
Which is what?
The word is yekayal.
Okay, yakayal. What does that root word mean structurally?
It comes from the root kayal, which means imagination or illusion. The text literally translates to, "It only seemed to them."
Wow, so the text is surgically precise here.
Very. It is telling us that the material reality of the ropes and staffs did not change. They did not alter the molecular structure of the wood or the hemp.
So how did they do it? What is the actual mechanism of the illusion?
Well, ancient illusionists used a variety of sophisticated techniques. They used hollowed-out staffs filled with heavy metals, like mercury.
Oh, and that would expand and cause the wood to twitch when heated by the hot sand?
Exactly. They use specific angles of light, rhythmic chanting, to induce a mild collective hysteria and forced perspective.
They understood the physical properties of their tools and the psychological vulnerabilities of massive crowds.
Meaning they knew exactly what
They're
they're...
fully aware they were hacking the audience's perception.
Yes. As the engineers of the illusion, they knew there was a massive discrepancy between what was structurally real and what the audience was perceiving.
They knew they were running a simulation.
Exactly. They know the code of the simulation because they wrote it.
Right. But then the paradigm shift occurs.
Verse 26.45, Moses throws his staff, and the text says it swallows their fabrications.
Now, without getting bogged down in the mechanics of how Moses' demonstration operated, because, our focus is the sociological reaction here.
Right, let's look at what happens to the PR guys when they observe Moses' action.
Because they are the foremost experts in manufactured reality.
They know every trick, every misdirection, every psychological hack.
They know what a trick looks like because they invented the tricks. So when they look at what Moses brings, what is their technical evaluation?
Their technical evaluation is immediate and absolute. They recognize this is non-illusory. This is non-manufactured.
Wow.
This is operating on a frequency of reality that we cannot simulate and we cannot hack.
It's like a team of the world's best CGI artists, like the people who build billion-dollar superhero movies looking at a piece of video footage.
And suddenly realizing, wait a minute, there are no pixels here.
This isn't rendered. The lighting isn't artificial. This is actual physical reality.
And because they are professionals, their reaction to encountering objective structural reality is immediate. They drop to their knees.
But we have to look at the exact phrasing of their declaration here in verses 47 and 48, because it proves this is not a religious conversion.
Right. Because they do not say, we believe in Moses.
Which is what you'd expect, right? They don't say, Moses is our new king, we are joining the cult of Moses.
No. The text says they declare, we believe in the Lord of the worlds, the Lord of Moses and Aaron.
Okay, we need to unpack this phrase, Lord of the worlds, or Rab Alamin.
Yes. In the context of this sociological reading, Rab Alaminian is not just a theological title for a deity.
Wait, let's translate that for a second. When you say it's not just a theological title, what are they actually submitting to?
They are submitting to the rational governing principle of productive reality, the ultimate structural order of the universe.
Do you mean they suddenly recognize that the universe has unbreakable laws? Like physics, cause and effect, objective truth?
Yes, laws that simply do not care about what Pharaoh's PR team says.
That is wild.
They are acknowledging that there is an objective reality that supersedes the state's manufactured illusions.
They are basically saying, our entire career has been built on manipulating perception for a corrupt regime. We've just witnessed an undeniable, unmanufactured truth.
Exactly. And as professional evaluators of evidence, our verdict is that the rational order of the universe, Rab al-Alamin, is the ultimate authority, not the state.
It is an epistemological upgrade. They are aligning themselves with the rational order over the manufactured spectacle.
They're choosing data over spin.
And that is the most devastating professional verdict Pharaoh could possibly receive, because it doesn't come from a random peasant who is easily impressed.
No, it comes from his own lead engineers.
Which sets up what is arguably the most critical pivot in the entire narrative.
Because how Pharaoh responds to this professional verdict reveals the absolute core of how authoritarian systems function.
Look at his reaction in verse 26.49. This is arguably the most terrifying line in the text because of what he doesn't say.
Right. When his top experts declare that Moses' demonstration is objectively real, Pharaoh doesn't yell, your math is wrong.
He doesn't say, you fell for a cheap trick, let me show you where he hid the wires.
He doesn't attempt to debate the evidence at all.
So what does he actually say?
He says, amantum lahu kabla and atana lakum.
Which translates to,
You believed in him before I gave you permission.
before I gave you permission. I want everyone listening to just sit with the sheer absurdity and the absolute terror of that statement.
It's chilling.
As a leader, he isn't challenging their data. He isn't accusing his scientists of a flawed methodology. He's accusing them of being unauthorized to reach a conclusion.
This right here is the defining feature of what we call the Mala epistemological architecture.
The Mala being the ruling elite.
Right. Pharaoh is saying the quiet part out loud here. He is revealing the engine of his entire state apparatus. In Pharaoh's system, truth is not derived from objective evidence.
Truth is whatever the authority permits you to conclude.
Exactly. Evidence must be filtered through power.
Let's go back to our corporate analogy for a second.
Oh yeah, that works perfectly here.
Imagine a corporate scientist doing a massive multi-year study on a chemical their company produces. The scientist discovers it is highly toxic and causing cancer in the local water supply. They bring the data to the CEO.
And the CEO doesn't read the data and say, your sample size is too small, or your methodology is flawed.
No. The CEO looks at the scientist and says, you weren't authorized to run those tests, and you certainly aren't authorized to publish those findings without my prior approval.
The data is completely irrelevant to the CEO. The chain of command is the only thing that matters.
And you can see the fatal structural crack this exposes in Pharaoh's regime.
Oh, absolutely. The entire deen, the entire socioeconomic system, is built on the foundational claim that the state dictates reality.
The state tells you what is true, what is false, who has value, and who is destined to be a slave.
But if the state's own top evaluators of evidence, the very people hired to maintain the illusion,
Yeah.
if they can look at raw data and reach a conclusion independently of the dictator's pre-approval, then the state's monopoly on truth is void.
It shatters the illusion completely. If the PR guys stop spinning and say, actually, the whistleblower is completely right, the water is poisoned, the game is over.
A conclusion that the authority has not pre-approved is not merely a public relations inconvenience.
Right, it is a structural, existential threat to the authority itself.
Because if evidence can be evaluated independently of the dictator, then Pharaoh's claim to determine truth is a lie.
And if he doesn't determine truth, then he isn't a god. He's just a corrupt politician running a fragile economy built on exploitation.
And that realization terrifies him, which is why the situation escalates so violently and so quickly.
Because Pharaoh instantly bypasses any attempt at debate and moves straight to physical terror.
He does. Still in verse 26.49, he threatens the sorcerers with cross amputation.
Cutting off opposite hands and feet. And crucifixion.
The sheer brutality is shocking. It's designed to be the ultimate deterrent.
But the escalation is the tell. Right?
It is. It is the clearest symptom of what we call epistemic bankruptcy.
Let's unpack epistemic bankruptcy clearly. You mean a system that has run entirely out of facts, out of arguments, out of data, and has to rely entirely on fear to maintain compliance.
Precisely. An authority whose epistemological position is secure, an authority that actually possesses the truth, does not need to butcher people who reach a different conclusion.
Right, it simply demonstrates why their conclusion is wrong.
If Pharaoh had real evidence, he would just bring it out and humiliate the sorcerers mathematically or scientifically.
But he cannot demonstrate why their conclusion is wrong because they are right.
So his only remaining option is to destroy the observers.
If you can't break the data, you break the scientists.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And this introduces a massive sociological principle from our source material known as the law of requital, or mukafati amal.
Mukafati amal. What does that mean in the context of political systems?
The law of requital conceptually states that actions have inherent, inescapable structural consequences.
It's like the socio-political equivalent of Newton's third law.
Right. In the political sphere, the law of requital dictates that when a system cannot win on evidence and debate, it inevitably deploys violence.
But the deployment of violence to suppress evidence is the very mechanism that destroys the system's legitimacy.
By deploying violence, the system is loudly announcing its own epistemic bankruptcy to the public.
It's the ultimate cell phone. By threatening to literally crucify his own PR team in front of the entire nation, Pharaoh is basically screaming to the crowd,
I have no arguments left.
the evidence against me is so undeniably strong that I have to brutally execute anyone who acknowledges it.
He isn't showing strength. He is broadcasting his absolute fragility.
The violence is an admission of defeat.
It really is. And look at how this completes the transformation of the sorcerers. Think about their arc over this single day.
It's incredible. They started the day as the primary instruments of Pharaoh's epistemic architecture.
They were the architects of the lie. But by the end of the day, their professional knowledge, deployed in service of manufactured spectacle,
Has been turned by their own honest evaluation into the most damaging testimony possible against the state.
they literally became the undeniable proof that the state is a fraud.
Because who better to expose a manufactured reality than the chief engineers of that reality?
Their verdict carries immense, crushing weight precisely because of their expertise.
Right, if a random, uneducated peasant submitted to Moses, Pharaoh could just dismiss it.
But when the architects of the lie refuse to lie anymore, the entire structure of the state propaganda collapses.
And this brings us to a really profound psychological question that our source material spends significant time analyzing.
Yeah, we have to ask, How do these people, these pampered, state-funded elite professionals, suddenly find the courage to face crucifixion?
Seriously, they walked into the arena asking for a bonus, and a few hours later, they are accepting a brutal, agonizing death sentence without flinching.
That is the real mystery here. What breaks their conditioning?
Because they were part of the machine, they were comfortable, they were the elite, they had everything to lose.
To understand that, the source introduces a philosophical commentary on the human condition. It's heavily influenced by thinkers who analyze the psychology of colonization and subjugation.
Okay.
It centers on the profound difference between a subjugated mind, what the text calls a makum, and a free mind, an azad.
Makum and Azad. Let's dig deep into those two states of being, because this feels incredibly relevant to how we operate today.
So let's start with the makum, the subjugated mind. A subjugated society, or an individual, operates almost entirely on the fear of public opinion and the preservation of the physical self.
They do things simply because that's how our ancestors did it.
Right. Or they avoid acknowledging the truth because they fear what society will say or what the authority will do to their career or their body.
I mean, how many times have you, listening to this right now, accepted a piece of conventional wisdom just because of public opinion?
Or stayed quiet in a meeting when you knew the data was wrong but you didn't want to rock the boat.
That is the Makum tendency. The intellect is basically asleep. It is driven by conformity, peer pressure, and self-preservation.
A makum will sell their faith, their intellect, and their integrity just to feed their body and maintain their social status.
Which perfectly describes the sorcerers at the beginning of the narrative.
Yes, they are the ultimate makum. They are slaves to Pharaoh's system, seeking validation, wealth, and proximity to power.
They care about their social standing and their bank accounts above all else.
They are willing to manufacture a lie to keep the masses subjugated as long as their invoice clears.
But then they are confronted with objective, undeniable, structural truth.
Yes, and when the human intellect is presented with absolute clarity, when the evidence is so overwhelming that it cannot be rationalized away, the intellect has the potential to wake up.
This is the activation of the Azad intellect, the truly free mind.
Exactly.
So what happens psychologically in that transition? How do they go from demanding a paycheck to accepting crucifixion?
They undergo a radical psychological emancipation. An Azad intellect recognizes that truth objective reality is infinitely more valuable than biological survival or social status.
They transition from slaves of the system, who preserve their bodies at the expense of their minds,
to free individuals who will sacrifice their bodies to preserve their enlightened intellect.
They stop caring about state-sponsored public opinion. The fear of Pharaoh, the fear of losing their elite status, the fear of the crowd mocking them, it all just evaporated.
Because once you see the structural reality of the universe, the Rabb al-Alamin, the threats of a corrupt dictator suddenly seem very small.
Very petty and entirely irrelevant.
They recognized that Pharaoh's power was an illusion, just like the optical illusions they used to perform with their staffs.
Why fear an illusion when you have aligned yourself with the permanent rational order of the universe?
That's the core of it.
That is incredibly profound. It's not just a political rebellion we are reading about. It is a total psychological emancipation.
The authoritarian system didn't just lose its PR team. It lost its hold over their minds.
And a system built entirely on fear and manufactured consent cannot survive when its citizens are no longer afraid to look at the data.
Which brings us to the final synthesis of our deep dive today. When we take the sentimental theology out of this text,
And we analyze it through this rigorous sociological lens.
we realize that the most significant event in the Moses narrative is not the parting of the sea.
No, the parting of the sea is just the physical conclusion. The most structurally significant event, the fatal blow to the empire, is the moment the state's own technical professionals
The people who know exactly how the sausage of propaganda is made.
refuse to pretend they don't know what they're looking at.
Exactly. This entire episode is a masterful study in what happens when an evidence suppression apparatus encounters evidence it absolutely cannot suppress.
And that evidence is processed by people who cannot be bullied into unseeing it.
The sorcerer's prostration is the structural crack in Pharaoh's system. And Pharaoh's response, threatening them with death simply for reaching an unauthorized conclusion, is exactly what a system looks like when it knows the crack is fatal but cannot address the underlying rot.
It's the moment the authoritarian realizes he doesn't control reality. He only controls the violence.
And violence is the last desperate refuge of a dying, epistemically bankrupt system.
And we must recognize that this dynamic, this mala-epistemological architecture, is not confined to the sands of ancient history.
No, the tyranny of unproven assertions, the reliance on manufactured consent, the fear of unauthorized conclusions, these are structural realities that exist in boardrooms, governments, and media ecosystems today.
And that is exactly where I want to leave you, the listener, to ponder. We promised you an intellectual teardown of an ancient myth, and we've given you a framework for civilizational survival.
But the ultimate value of this deep dive is how you apply it to the world around you right now.
Look at modern institutions, massive corporations, or political systems today. Think about the triumvirates of power, the politicians, the media conglomerates, the financial monopolies that exist right now.
When their internal experts, their data scientists, their whistleblowers, uncover undeniable structural truths.
Truths about algorithmic harm, about environmental collapse, about economic exploitation. Does the system engage with the evidence?
Or does it immediately deploy its PR apparatus to spin the narrative while seeking to financially, socially, or legally amputate and crucify the observers for reaching a conclusion without permission?
When a system attacks the messenger rather than engaging with the data, you are witnessing the modern pharaoh demanding permission to define reality.
You are watching the law of requital play out in real time.
And when you see that happen, you know the structural crack is already there. The illusion is failing. You just have to decide if you are going to be a makum, a subjugated mind acting on the fear of public opinion, or an azad, a free mind aligning with the truth no matter what the authority demands. That's the real deep dive. Think about it.